All right, guys. So what I've been thinking a lot about, especially since my podcast with Annie just dropped, and I shared a lot of my life now that I'm in this journey with This Naked Mind 3.5 years later, is the difference between sharing your wounds and sharing your scars. So wounds, of course, are trauma and experiences that are still fresh, that are still vulnerable, that still need time and care and nurturing and maybe privacy, versus when you're ready to share your scars. Scars, of course, are the strongest parts of our body because there's so much healing that's been developed. It's super strong. So sharing your scars can be really helpful because for me, my experience is that it strengthens my convictions. And I just love that my journey might inspire and help others. So I just was wondering how you guys feel about this issue and what's your experience with sharing wounds versus sharing scars? And I'm gonna just go straight to Kathleen because I know she's got a lot to say about this.
I think that's a really interesting distinction that I think is really important. That I definitely have been a person who has like overshared on a bar stool, told you all about all my childhood trauma, and now to do that same sort of thing would lead to some vulnerability, hangover. I guess I still get those when I share my truth and tenderness, my tender heart when I share that with someone else. And that's also like the beauty of connection, is that when I share something that has been hard and that I've grown from, that other people nodding their head and reacting to that in a way that feels supportive, like, yeah, that happened to me too. That's how I felt. Like the way I came out, like it was hard as a kid to come out in the world. And maybe it's different now, but it definitely was, there was a coming out and coming out from a place of like, oh, like I am way gay. I've been married for decades. Like, it's no big deal for me to share about being gay in the world. But there are also still, really tender feelings around being accepted in society and meeting new people and how they're going to feel about my ordinary little marriage that I have in Texas, in rural Texas, where I have some property. Like it's different than it is in the city where I live. So I think that there's something really beautiful about vulnerability and sharing our truth. And it is absolutely okay to choose what you share or don't share in all sorts of arenas, whether it is in a support group like, This Naked Mind, on a podcast, with your friends, with your neighbors, with your partner. Like, what do you want to share about your alcohol journey? Like, completely personal, your sexuality, or any part of the rainbow sexuality that you want to share or not share. Like, it's okay.
Hey, can I piggyback on that a little bit? I really appreciate you bringing that last part up. It's okay to, it's okay to share whatever you feel at any time with anyone. I noticed that when I'm really vulnerable, I do get a lot of just reaction from people and connection with people but one of the things that took me a while to learn was that my story does belong to me, and that I don't have to tell everybody everything all the time, and that I'm not lying if I omit something sometimes. And if it, depending on maybe what company I'm in or, who I'm talking to. And because I used to feel that way when I wanted to start sharing my story. I would feel like if I didn't share everything, that there would, obviously I have some, relationship with lying I was really, I did a lot of hiding, a lot of, avoiding and I dare say manipulation when I'm wanting to make things turn out the way I wanted them to be I feel like I'm digressing a little bit, but what I want to say is it was just completely freeing to learn that my story does belong to me and that it is okay to again share what I want, what I feel comfortable, and that changes over time too. Sometimes what you're comfortable sharing and not sharing. So, and the wounds are sometimes so much harder to share, but boy, it feels really good to get feedback and connection with people when they come from the same place you are, or you're able to be open and let someone help you take care of your wounds, heal those wounds. So that's my take.
Hey, Darcy, I
Oh,
can
sorry, go.
follow up with that. Oh, go ahead.
No,
You
you
want to go,
go.
Soraya?
No, you go, you go.
Okay. I love what both Darcy and Kathleen said about, it's your story. You share what you want to share, and there is no, I remember when I first heard, share your scars, not your wounds. And I think that sounds good, but yet it's another binary that just doesn't exist in the world. It's a nice, neat category, but when I first heard it, I thought, well, is this a scar yet? You get too much in your head about these things. So I think it's just better to say, share what you want to share, and what you're comfortable sharing in the group that you're with, in the company that you're with. And as I think Darcy said, and that'll change over time, depending on who you're with, your own state of mind, all kinds of things. So I think it's just important to really be guided by our own internal wisdom, and going with our gut and and if we feel, not from our mind telling us, oh, I'm afraid to share this, but from a deeper place that says share, or says no, to respect that. One thing I will say is that whenever I do share and am vulnerable, my mind will come in after the fact and say, oh, why did you say that? And I've gotten a lot better just knowing what that is and saying, okay, now that's my mind second guessing, going on the replay and giving me the replay and what I did wrong, what I should have said, what I shouldn't have said. And I think it's just to see that for what it is, that's going to happen. And it's okay. It's okay. But once it's out there, I think from my experience, that there's just an incredible amount of support when we share our vulnerabilities, our struggles, whether it's a scar or still a wound. I don't think it matters. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I love that, Michael. I feel like my mind is doing something with the scar and wound thing that I want to give a little space for as well. And like, for me, the scar is like the story, like you've had the reflection and the time to really experience healing. And that's what makes it a scar. And the wound to me is very present. It's very like easily triggered. It's like right here. It's like, it hasn't kind of completed a cycle energetically and psychically and emotionally. It's live, and for me, my wounds I have to be with people that I trust. And if I can, at this point in my life, to be directive and intentional about when I go there, and that I'm like, that I know that the person that's receiving me can hold hold the energy for the wound to be guided through me so it can enter into a healing state. Now, this I realize is all like, you know, this is the best case scenario, and my wounds come out all the time, you know, without my intention. And I feel really strongly about the resources that I've learned how to build, where I can go and express those wounds in safe places, and that my scars are more like, I can share my scars with anyone because they're mine and I know them and they're complete, you know. And my wounds, not so much. Like my wounds, I feel a little bit more protective of because they're in a process still, and I don't know how much in reality they are. Like, I think they're very much in a story that might be playing out in reality, but I don't want them to just spill over onto anyone. And yeah, that's what it brings up.
Yes. Go. No? Me? Okay. Yeah. So for me, this topic it's very timely. Certainly because Lance, like you just said at the beginning of this, you know, you just shared your story. And I think for me, this whole process, if anybody knows me, I've struggled with trying to tell my story since you all met me. And it's because of that, I think that feeling of wanting to be authentic and but then questioning whether or not that's too much, or that's too dark, or that's too this, or that's too that, or is there too much shame around that? Is it a shame that I don't want to tell somebody, or is it really just private? It's private. It's my business. It's not everybody else's. And so and then there's times when I think that the not telling, or the not sharing, or the not accepting all of it is holding me back. And so you really kind of struggle with that kind of thing. And sometimes I'd be like, sometimes there are points in my life where it's like, and it's like, I think what Michael just said, where it's like, sometimes you're really good with thinking, I'm just going to share everything and who cares? And there's other times where it's like, I'm not telling anybody anything, it's like, I'm going to close the book. So it is true. It's like, I don't think the wounds and scars, I think it is, but it vacillates, for me at least, it vacillates. Sometimes it's a gaping wound and sometimes a scar, and it doesn't mean that anything else necessarily happened to make it better or worse. It's just sometimes I feel better about it than I do other times, because it's the same trauma. And especially now that I'm working on past trauma, things that I thought were either over or maybe I didn't even think about are coming back up. And so it's kind of reigniting thoughts and feelings I didn't know I had. So that's also another, like, wow, okay, now I'm all upset about that again after 30 years. So yeah, so it's interesting, but there's a part of me that's like, yeah, it's no wonder I drank, or that I tried to numb my life because it was so horrible. But then it's like, but everybody's life is horrible. I mean, if you think about it, none of us escaped trauma. Nobody had a great life trauma-free, I guess. It's just some people dealt with it better than others, and it's just because we're all different from a standpoint of how we experience the same thing. Like, Lance, you're going to experience the same situation differently than I might. And again, that's the whole point of trauma not being what happened to you, but what happens inside of you because of it. Yeah, so I think, and that's for me, I think it'll be a process probably for the rest of my life. And that's why this whole like all this work and everything, it is just, you just have to keep doing it. Like it's, I've always, I think that was one of my problems, and why this has kind of worked this time is because I put down that, well, as soon as this is done, then I'll be good and I'll go back to the way I used to be. And I did every time. So, and this time it was like, no, there is no going back. Like this is just straightforward now. But I also think I could go back. I mean, any of us could.
Lance, you wanted to go?
No, you go ahead, Justin.
Okay. Just thinking about this topic and what everyone's saying, I think it kind of came up for me yesterday when I was doing the intro, and normally I'm like, I think I'm like an overshare, but I think I've turned into not overshare as I've stopped drinking. And I think I'm not really sure like why. But like I was trying to figure out what to say and I didn't really prepare for it. And I didn't really prepare for me to say something that I actually said. I was like, I thought about afterwards and I thought about how I said, I liked like beer and cars, and that was like my childhood fitting in as a boy, and then beer as in my adult, to fit in. And I think that being different was not something that was really something I experienced so much as a kid. I mean, I knew that I was different, but I think like I grew up in a very, like everyone was very similar, right? I remember I went to Hebrew school and I asked a kid if they were Jewish, and they're like, of course. And it was like such like a traumatic thing for me because I was like, wait, I was like, I think that was like my experience of life. Like everybody was the same like that, right? And so I think as I got older I didn't want to stand out. And I think drinking kind of let me to kind of stand out in another way and to kind of let loose and all that stuff. And I think now, like even just talking about this now in this moment, like I have no idea what I even was talking about saying that experience, but I think it is to say that like that experience of remembering that, like I was looking for change, I was looking for diversity, I was looking for differences everywhere in my environment, but it just wasn't really there. And I learned that if it was different, it was a threat, right? Like, and so going to college and meeting people from all over the United States, it was like I'm out of this like bubble of New Jersey, New York Jews who were just here, and it's like, wow, and I remember meeting a lot of people and they were like telling me about where they lived, and I felt it was like hard for me to comprehend some stuff, right? So it was almost like this kind of like sheltered life, and then just wanting to just be different was something that just you don't do that. Right? Like you don't like just talking about this and being gay and being alcohol free are such two big vulnerabilities for me, because even though I did come out at 17, I would say that I spent a lot of time not trying to come out afterwards. And I feel like when I did the intro, I was like, wow, I just like came out to all these people who are going to watch me on this video. Right? I was like, I just came out again. It was like this really weird thought, because I'm so private and I just don't want to share things and I don't want to be vulnerable and I don't want to be spoken about afterwards, right? And so I protect myself all the time from that. And that's got to be from old wounds and scarring. I've actually never really thought about the concept of wounds and scars too. So I think that's why I'm not really sure of exactly how to phrase all this, but that was just my experience in sharing in the intro. And then going on a podcast I went on, and I actually listened to myself afterwards, and I wasn't going to, but I didn't really share. I didn't overshare anything. I didn't leave myself vulnerable in any way. But yeah, this whole experience has just been a lot, because here I am talking about being alcohol free and gay. Who knows who's going to watch it? Who knows who's not going to watch it? You know, all those things out there. And, you know, I grew up, my family, don't tell anybody by yourself. You know, I don't want to be too extreme here, but don't tell anybody you're Jewish. They'll, you know, like one day it'll happen, you know, all that stuff. Like, and I know they're all persecuted in different ways in the group and all that stuff. I'm not saying it's any different, but I'm just saying, you know, growing up in a fear state to be, to not blend in, definitely is a wound. And I think the scarring is who I've become. And I don't think that's a negative thing. I think it's a positive thing. So.
It's beautiful.
Wow, you guys, this is also beautiful. And I feel like it's such a rich conversation. And as you guys were talking, I was thinking about how growing up queer, like any marginalized group, we have to be safe, we have to see what the larger group thinks, believes, does, because we're constantly on guard. And so as you guys were talking, I was thinking a lot about that's part of our trauma, is that we have to watch out. I shared in my podcast that I flunked kindergarten because I was already freaked out, because I knew there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to hide it. I knew I was not okay. And even in my adulthood, that trance, that belief, still walks with me, even in gay groups, even in queer groups, which is really so heartbreaking, right? That even, I was thinking, a drag queen told me, do not tell another drag queen anything she does not need to know, because she will use it against you, right? And, gay men are notoriously horrible at picking on your flaws and your, and I'm not speaking just in judgment. I'm sure I'm guilty of that as well. But one thing I thought about is how, with wounding, when you're wounded, you stop, everything has to stop, right? To heal and to nurture and to be okay. Everything has to stop. So that just kind of popped into my head. And then I thought, with my experience with this whole process of coming out as queer and coming out as alcohol free, is that I noticed that the more transparent I am, the safer I actually feel. Like, if I'm just transparent, like, here it all is, come and get me. What you gonna do? What are you gonna do? But I have to feel that way. And I, of course I don't feel that way about everything. So I've loved hearing, I've heard so much wisdom from you guys. And I've loved hearing how it's not a black and white issue, that a scar can become a wound in a different situation and vice versa. So thank you guys. This is a really touching and moving and thought-provoking conversation. Appreciate it.
You.
Until next time.
Until next time. Yeah, no, that was really great, you guys. I'm always surprised about what you guys say. I'm like, wow.
I love what a lot of things stuck with me, but Justin, when you said, yeah, the scars, like who I've become, and like I'm really okay with that. I was like, woof. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Because it just kind of like that kind of came up, like that was like the kind of formed from that, right? Like just thought of it. So I was trying to figure out what exactly all that stuff meant. But yeah, like, I think it's the truth. Like, we are what we've come from in so many different ways. And
yeah, because we wouldn't be here if we hadn't been there. I mean, that's kind of how I keep looking at it.
Yeah.
There's a reason I'm here,
Greg,
and I wouldn't have been there, because there would have been no reason for me to be here if I hadn't been there.
That's interesting.
Because
That
the other
scar-
thing too is I could be somewhere else. And that's not, could be a lot worse.
a scar can be, something that's ugly, like a deformity, but it can also be a badge of honor, almost like a tattoo.
Mhm,
Mhm.
I survived this.
mhm. And yeah, I feel like that was also because I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting the feeling like this is mutually felt, but there's been a lot of coming out and vulnerable publicness over the last month or so with the podcast and doing this. And I'm just like, I have been constantly like thinking about what I've said or like that, oh my God, I like parts of me that are like, you were not supposed to share that. And it's like, oh my God, like I'm living bigger, I'm living bigger, I'm living bigger. And it's like all of my recordings from growing up conditioned, oppressively conditioned by the society are like, you are unsafe. And it's like, no, I'm not. Like what Lance said, it's like, come and get me. It's like, there's nobody, like, this is really positive. Like, how did I think that I needed to hide this? And it's like, well, there's a lot of reasons. And now you don't have to hide it. Like, and you can give other people permission to not hide it. And it's just so beautiful to see
Yes.
it and like be with each other through it,
And we're all here because people before us shared their wounds and
Yeah.
their scars. That's why we're here. That's why we had the audacity and the little bit of bravery that we had to make recordings and have them put up publicly. And I'm constantly surprised by the little messages I get here and there from people that I know and don't know who
Mhm.
thank me, like, thank you so much. You don't know who you're going to help when you open your mouth and
Yeah.
are visible.
I worked at a high school for 8 years. So I worked with two groups of kids who went all through high school. Never told any of them that I was gay. Never told them anything about myself except that I had a dog named Moses and I lived in Brooklyn. And I would think about that all the time. And other teachers would come out and I just would never tell them. And please, they suspected it. They were really out there with the things they said and did. And I remember when I stopped working there, I like accepted a couple of their Instagram or Facebook requests or whatever. And this kid that I worked with, 4 years of high school, like basically he's like lives in California now. He like writes movies or whatever. It's like great for him. He messaged me and he like asked me something and I told him like, oh, because I moved to Amsterdam. And he asked me like what I was doing and I told him like, oh, I'm here with my boyfriend. And I said, like I literally said to him, was like, you didn't know that about me. And he goes, I said, hope that doesn't change anything. And I was like, this was, this when I was still drinking. And he said, obviously that doesn't change anything. It's like, and it was like a moment where I was like, oh, wow, like, but there are so many missed opportunities because there's so many kids I worked with who were struggling with their sexuality and all that stuff. But I never said it. And you always use the backdrop of what I learned as training as, no one needs to know anything about you. It's not about you, it's about them, and everything will come up about that. But yeah, that's how like closed off I was. And there's so many moments in time where I think like, what would have been different if I worked at a high school again as a social worker, if I wasn't a drinker, like how different the experience would be. I don't think I'm going to try that theory out, but I'm just saying like, if that would have been, what would have happened? And there's so many,
That's a gift of coaching versus like traditional therapy also, is
Yeah.
that being able to share yourself instead of it being that you need to protect yourself and share nothing about who
Yes.
you are in the world. So I think that's one of the things that's been really beautiful about coaching.
Yeah, that's one thing that I actually definitely appreciated too a little bit when some of the work I've done, especially like in this arena, like with drinking and stuff, like, well, like here I am, that's interesting, right? Now I'm like oversharing my experience with someone about drinking, yet I would never share my experience of being a human, right? In a sense with these kids.
Right. But I think it's misguided to think that the therapist or the coach or the whoever's listening, they're co-creating the reality with you, whether you believe it or not, whether
Yeah.
they're just sitting there totally not responding. Their energy, their being is there with you. Something is happening.
Absolutely, 100%.
And for us to not take responsibility for that or act like that's not happening seems irresponsible to me. So yeah.
On the other extreme, I think, like one of the things that it's a slogan that I got from Al-Anon in the 90s, and has served me so well, is it's none of my business what other people think of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been so helpful. And through the work of Byron Katie, realizing that no two people I've ever met, like my Soraya is different than Michael Soraya is different than Jeff Soraya, right? We live in each other,
Yeah.
right? And so if
Yeah.
somebody sees me, whether it's positive or negative, that's theirs. And it's always about them, 100%, which is really mind-boggling.
My Soraya's awesome. My Darcy's awesome. My Jeff's awesome. My Michael's awesome.
And that's what I was
Justin's
saying
awesome.
too.
My
Lance,
Lance's
about
And
the
that's
awesome.
trauma.
all
It's
yours.
like-
And that's all yours.
It's like it's the same way like two siblings can be raised by the same parents and have this completely different, childhood experiences because they weren't raised by the same parents because they experienced their parents completely different,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're
Wow,
the same people.
So that
And the
helps
parents
me.
will swear, we raised them the same.
And we
But they
take
didn't
their
experience you the
reactions.
same.
We take their reactions, incorporate it into ourselves, and then we become those reactions to the other people in our life, right? So it's like, like here we have this person who reminds me of that person. I'm gonna treat this person like that. I'm gonna feel this way in the face of that. Like this person looks like that. I'm gonna respond to the way that that person looked when they looked at me. Like, it's this whole thing. And then here we are wondering, what's going on. Still trying to figure it out.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. A
Mm.
lot, yeah.
I love it.
I'm gonna have to
Love
log
this.
in, guys. We've got dinner planned, so
Enjoy.
It's so good to
Need
see
to
you, Michael.
Joy.
so good to
Hi,
see you
Michael.
all.
You would see the biggest gift would be for me, and the kind of touch would say thank you for being a friend.
It's like, God, there's like 20 minutes. We're not even talking about alcohol.
That's how I feel like mine was too. But I loved it. I mean, that's the thing though, is like alcohol is a small piece of this. Like it's a small piece.
Mhm.
Small piece and it's a huge piece. So thanks for saying that, you guys. And the thing I'll say is that, so that dropped, and then my advertisement dropped in This Naked Mind, and Just Emotion, where there were these yellow flowers that the perfume was overwhelming. It's fucking fogging here in the Castro, but I drove out there and the sky opened up. I've never seen so many whales migrating. There were people flying, like hang glider people flying, pelicans below and above. It was just like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. But yeah, I just had to really take care of myself and turn everything off.
Are we all gonna take our turn in that one?
I'm sorry, Jeff. I'm like, what the hell are you doing?
Oh, can you see
He's
me doing that?
experimenting. He's experimenting, baby.
He's experimenting. I'm just fucking with you.
This is how I learn.